Hi there, I'm Roger Mittag. Welcome to the Style Sessions and thank you very much for joining us. In this second session, we're going to take a look at a very old historical style of beer that came to popularity in the 1400s and then vanished again and then was brought back to life in the 1970s. And that is Belgian Witbier. So let's start off with explaining what a Witbier is. So Witbiers, wit means white in Flemish. Sometimes they're called bière blanche or white beers. So you'll see those on the shelves. And the name Witbier applies to the very light pale color associated with this particular style. And these are very old historical styles. So what I'm going to do in each of these style sessions, I'm going to take the beer and I'm going to pour it into what I think is an appropriate glass. It may not always be the glass that you see with the branding on it, but it's something that I like, and I'll explain why I think these things are important. So cool style is basically a wheat beer, but we'll talk a little bit more about that once I pour it. So the brand I'm going to use is Hoegaarden. And the reason I'm using Hoegaarden is it is the one that reestablished the brand in the 1970s. And also, I believe that this is the gold standard of Belgian wit beers across the world. It still has the same characteristics that I first discovered in 1997. And I think it's a fabulous example of this particular style. So what I'm going to do first is, because I want to pour this properly for you, I'm not going to do the traditional pouring method, but what I'm going to do is invert it. So Belgian wit beers are typically re-fermented or bottle conditioned, which means they have yeast added in there. The reason the yeast is added in there is it gets rid of all the oxygen. It eats oxygen, it creates slightly higher levels of CO2, and a moderate amount of alcohol is consumed, but the yeast is still active in there. It's one of the reasons that these beers are so nice and cloudy. This is really nice and cold. It's meant to be cold when you're drinking it. So I'm just rotating it right now because there's an air pocket on the inside of the bottle that's going to wash all the sediment away and put it into the entire beer, so that when I pour it, you get an idea of exactly what it's supposed to look like. So the glass I'm going to use is this one. It's called a Linnea glass. And I like it because it's tall, and refreshing beers should go into this. So we're going to open it, and then we're going to pour nice and gently in there. And I'll show you, what I'm looking for when I get to this particular style of beer. So because I've agitated it, the foam is pretty active. So this is exactly what I want in this particular beer. It's a really light color. It's very pale. It's almost lemon or lemon meringue, if you will. I like the fact that it's got all this cloudiness in it. It's got this meringue frothy top on the top. The head is snow white. So the cloudiness comes from two things. It comes from both the re-fermentation and the yeast added to the bottle, but it also comes from unmalted wheat and not being filtered. Unmalted wheat is very starchy and leaves a lot of cloudiness in the particular beer, but it also adds a little bit of mouthfeel. It's perfect. So let me explain what you should be looking for in a Belgian wit beer. So these beers, they use spice and fruit. And for the most part, historically, the spice that's been used has been coriander, and the fruit that's been used has been orange. But I've seen all kinds of different variations of this particular style. The orange is usually dried orange and curacao orange, and the coriander comes in coriander seeds. Now, coriander is the seed of the cilantro plant. And what you should expect when you smell this beer is both citrus and spice. And I'll get into that a little bit more right now. So the citrus you're going to smell is probably a little bit of orange, but it could also be lemon or lemongrass. And the reason for that is that coriander has a very citrusy kind of aroma if you take fresh coriander seed and grind it up in your hands, or mortar and pestle. So you get all these really nice lemony notes, but you also get a little bit of the spice from the coriander as well. So that's why that lemongrass is in there. The other aromatics that you could be getting out of this beer is fresh dough, and that's going to come from the yeast and the unmalted wheat that's in there. but typically you get those characteristics. Now, anybody that has an aversion to cilantro or coriander might also know that those characteristics tend to come along with a perfumey or soapy kind of characteristic. And those are true. Those are accurate descriptions of what the aromatics are. I don't particularly find that offensive. I find it quite refreshing and interesting. And then the last note that you might want to look for is a little bit of bubble gum or banana, and that's really coming from Belgian style yeasts. So when you take a sip, you're going to find that it's got a really, really quick finish. And that means it's in and out of your mouth almost immediately, and it's got very little aftertaste. It doesn't leave a lot in your mouth. It leaves a little bit of texture, and that's because of the wheat. But the higher level of carbonation helps to cleanse your palate and wash that away. It's a very, very refreshing beer. So now that we've understood the beer, let's go back in time and figure out where it came from. So if we go back, almost 1,000 years, we can assume that any of the breweries were probably using, or anybody brewing was probably using, ingredients that were readily available. And this particular area in Belgium is rife with wheat fields. So wheat was the dominant grain that was being used in this style of beer. Of course, during the Middle Ages, the Netherlands were very important in the spice trade, and Belgium was very close to the Netherlands, also participated in the spice trade. So people started using different kinds of flavoring ingredients at that time. You would have seen anything and everything going into beer. So coriander was a mainstay at that point in time. Style goes on. It's probably very, very small for hundreds of years, and then it pretty much dies in the 1800s. Now, I should say that this particular brand, Hoegaarden, dates back to 1445 in a beautiful little town called Hoegaarden. And we know that through 1445 into much more, probably in the 1800s, a lot of this style of beer was made in abbeys and monasteries. So let's hit forward to the 1800s. 1842, a revolution happens, and those are Pilsners. And because of Pilsners and the interest in Pilsners throughout the years, the interest in Witbiers waned, and it basically disappeared off the face of the earth. Until the 1970s, when a man named Pierre Celis decided to resurrect this style. He thought it was an important part of history in Hoegaarden. He was a milkman in Hoegaarden and decided to recreate the brewery. And he did so, and he had quite a bit of success until a fire. And then he got support from Interbrew and eventually sold to Interbrew. Fast forward a few more years, Pierre's not happy because he doesn't own the brand anymore, but he still wants to brew. So he still has that passion and that fire to brew the beer. So what he does is he does a little bit of research and finds out where the water quality is the same as what he experienced in Hoegaarden. And lo and behold, he finds that Austin, Texas has the same water minerality. So he moves lock, stock, and barrel to Austin, Texas, and creates Celis White. It's an iconic brand. We're seeing more of it in the industry these days. And there's a lot of craft brewers making Belgian-style wit beers. And the thing that you have to take into consideration is in Belgium they use 25 to 30% unmalted wheat and orange and coriander. And again, with beer styles, interpretation by the brewer is very important. I've seen elderflowers used, cardamom used. There are all kinds of different spices and aromatics that can be used in these particular beers. The thing you have to remember is it well balanced? Is it easy to drink? Do you want another one? And with this style, I think it's a great, great refreshing beer. You can do a lot of different things with it. It's great to pair with different kinds of foods like seafood, salmon, shrimp. It's got so many wonderful characteristics to it, but the key thing is that it's refreshing. So thanks for joining me. Hope you'll join us for the next one, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.